here. It's one of those things that I think you learn over time that you never want to get in between your presentation and food, but I guess you guys are eating during the presentation, which is great. So I'd like to share with you just a few things that I've learned over the years. I talk about being a very reluctant entrepreneur, and I still think of myself that way. Even though I've been at this for a long time and I've been involved in a lot of different companies, the way that I see myself is I'm still a scientist, and that's where I've tried to keep myself centered on, focused on the science. So it's interesting that I've told people I was the world's most reluctant entrepreneur. I left academia literally kicking and screaming. I did not want to leave a nice tenure-track faculty position that I had, and at the same time, I've started 8 companies. So how do those two things both be true? And I think I still am. I still consider myself reluctant. The thing that really does drive me at the end of the day is being able to take science and translating it into something that can actually really benefit people. And I've been so fortunate to be involved in discovering 18 drugs that have moved into people. So 18 times I've stood at the moment where a drug that I helped discover entered into humans for the first time. And every single one of those moments was the result of someone choosing not to quit. And that's really what this comes down to is, it takes so much determination and so much effort to move something from an idea into something that can really help people. I hope that I'm not done. In fact, I've got number 19 and 20 ready to go. So this year, I should get to 20 drugs that I've been involved in discovering that move into the clinic. So what I want to spend the next few minutes talking about is just tell you a little bit about the path that I've taken, the journey that I've been on. I think it's helpful, especially for students, that I want to share with you not just good things that happened to me, but mistakes that I made. I was with Mark Ott recently, the new dean of the College of Medicine at Brigham Young University, and he mentioned something I've thought a lot about. Soren Kierkegaard's a very well-known philosopher, and he said something that I think about a lot now, that life can only be understood backwards, but it needs to be lived forwards. And so, looking back on my life, I can see where the things happen in my life that set me on paths that got me to where I'm at. And so the lessons that I've learned, and then I want to end up talking about the future, because for me, I'm a very optimistic person. I'm always thinking about what the next big thing is. So hopefully, this will be interesting, and hopefully we can go through this quickly. So at the end of the day, for me, my life's mission started when I was very young. So this is a picture of me on the right-hand side of me and my grandfather. It's the only picture that I have with me and my grandfather. He died shortly after this picture was taken. So the year I was born, he passed away of colon cancer. And, so a hole was left in my life from the very beginning that was taken. He died at 50 years old, so pretty young to die of colon cancer. And then here on the left-hand side is a picture of me, the last picture of me and my mother and my siblings. She died just a week after this was taken of the same disease, of colon cancer. So when I was young, people ask you all the time when you're a young kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was a big deal in our family that my grandfather died of cancer. And, even though I have no memory or recollection, it made an impact on me. And I used to tell people all the time I wanted to become a scientist and cure cancer. And that might be something a lot of people say, but I actually really wanted to do that. And that's what I decided from the time I was very young, that's what I was going to do with my life. And so, this whole goal for me has been, could I keep other people's grandfathers and keep people's mothers around a little longer? And that's really what motivates me. That's what I care about. And it's become even more impactful to me over the years. My father-in-law, this was my fishing buddy, somebody that I love dearly, passed away 2 years ago of leukemia. what's been really incredible about this story was when he was diagnosed with leukemia, we met with his doctor, and his doctor said, I'm going to treat him with this drug. And it was a drug that I worked on, that I was involved in getting approved. So, that abstract idea of keeping other people's mothers and fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers so long, I actually worked on a drug that my father-in-law got treated with. He actually had a great response. Unfortunately, it didn't last long enough, and we eventually lost him. But I learned a lot from my father-in-law about hunting and fishing. I really enjoy being outside, and I enjoy hunting and fishing. And what I've discovered is drug discovery and development is a lot like hunting and fishing. It's something that the best hunters that I've met are relentless, they're passionate, and they're always curious. They're always learning and trying new things. And for me, that's really been my life, is I'm relentless. When I decide to do something, I do it. I'm passionate about it, and I'm always try to stay curious and always try to learn new things. So I learned from a very early age to find really good mentors in my life. And I think this has been something, if I look at things that I've learned, if I look at my life in reverse, having good mentors is something that can change the trajectory of your life. So when I went to Brigham Young University as an undergraduate, this was my first mentor that I had, Dr. John Lamb. So a funny story how I ended up in Dr. Lamb's lab is my father is a PhD chemist, and my father got his PhD at Brigham Young University. And so when I went there, I was a chemistry undergraduate, and he said, well, tell me who the faculty are, read me down the names of the people. And so I started reading, faculty members, and he says, John Lamb, that guy owes me a favor. I helped him pass physical chemistry, and so you go into him and say, my dad helped you pass physical chemistry, and he says you need to hire me to work in your lab, which is exactly what I did. And Dr. Lamb just laughed and said, of course you can work with us. And he turned out to be a huge impact on my life. Really helped me learn how to love laboratory work, how to design experiments. I met amazing people. I don't know if Randy Peterson's out there. Randy and I both worked in the same lab together with Dr. Lamb and learned a lot together through that experience. So early on in my career, this is me when I still think of me looking like this, even though this is a long, long time ago. But, I had the amazing experience of being able to discover a gene, and not only discover a gene that actually turned out to be pretty important. So I was handed a tube, a little Eppendorf tube, when I was a first-year graduate student. And my professor said, hey, there's a cDNA in here of a brand new gene. We don't know what it is. You figure out what it is. And it turns out it was histone deacetylase. And so I spent the first couple of years of graduate school just sequencing and trying to figure out how we discovered it in a genetic screen and to figure out what it did. And it really changed my life. I tell everybody my career peaked pretty early. I think my first publication, I have more references than any other publication that I published. So my journey peaked pretty quickly. But what this led to is I really had a lot of opportunity because of this discovery. And for me, I look at it where, I feel like it's not just luck, it's opportunity meets preparation. That's when you can really see big things happen. And so, for me, being prepared to take advantage of opportunities that happen, and, luckily, when I got the opportunity to do things because of this discovery that we made, I was able to take advantage of that. And this was probably the biggest thing that happened was I caught the attention of a guy named Dan Von Hoff. And Dan has been my mentor for my whole life, a whole career. He was my postdoc mentor professor. He had started an institute called the Institute for Drug Development, and he had heard me give a talk as a graduate student about discovering histone deacetylase, and he offered me a position to come work with him. So Dan is an incredible mentor. He has run over 500 phase 1 clinical trials. Of all the cancer drugs that are out there, he probably was the first one to treat patients with 75% of those drugs. So he's an incredible person, has incredible knowledge, and just an amazing mentor that helped expose me to so many things. And so to me, I think I look at it and think the impact of that on my life, that he offered, this fellowship where he took me under his wing and he wanted to teach me what he knew. And I learned from him all the things that I needed to learn to figure out how to become the kind of person that I wanted to become, which was I wanted to cure cancer. I wanted to find things that could actually have an impact on people with those diseases. And he gave me a lot of tools and helped me learn a lot of things that allowed me to be able to do what I did. The very first industry experience I had was with Dan. Dan started a company called Ilex Oncology. And at Ilex, we had obtained an antibody called Campath, and we actually got that antibody approved for chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And so that was the first time I was peripherally involved. I was not the scientific driver behind any of this, but I at least was there when we started on Ilex Oncology. It started in a closet in our lab. And I remember the guy that we brought in to be the CEO of the company, I literally cleaned out the closet in the lab that he moved into to start the company. But I got to watch this move through the process of going into clinical trials and eventually being approved, and then Ilex getting acquired for over $1 billion. And this was back in the 1990s. $1 billion in the 1990s was it's still a big deal, but it was a big, big deal back then. So that was my first industry experience with the drug that I was involved with peripherally, at least, early on, and then got to see a move to approval. But during my postdoc, I learned one of the great things that I was able to do was to forge relationships with really smart people. And for whatever reason, right at the time that I was there was just incredible people that were there at the same time. If you guys are in the cancer world, you probably know some of these names, but I trained with all of these people. I'm dear friends with all of them. And, they all hold positions now. I mean, Mace Rothenberg was the chief medical officer of Pfizer for years, of all of Pfizer. And he was, just a fellow when I knew him back when I was a postdoctoral fellow. So I could go down the list. But one of the things I think I would emphasize to young people is forge relationships with really smart people, and especially your peers, because you just never know, in 30 years from now, your peers could end up to be some of the leaders in the industry in the world, which is what happened to me. So other lessons that I learned, Dan used to say all the time, there's no bad drugs, there's just bad clinical trials. And he caught a lot of flack for that. I would say there's lots of bad drugs, so I wouldn't agree with that side of things. But I think the premise of what he's saying is that a lot of times the reason why drugs fail is they're not put in the right situation to actually show that what their mechanism of action is, and a lot of times we don't know what the mechanism of action is, and so they fail because we run the wrong clinical trials. The other thing that he taught me was that cancer never sleeps, and neither should we. Dan is famous for sleeping about 3 or 4 hours a night. And as I've gotten older, I'm basically there with Dan. I wake up every morning between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, and that's kind of what he was like. And so I've kind of turned into a mini Dan, but I'm a lot bigger than him, so maybe I'm not a mini Dan, but I've followed in his footsteps. So one of the great things that I got to do as a postdoc is I actually discovered we were trying to do something that even today is quite challenging to do, and that's to try to personalize medicine for individuals. So we were running what is called the soft agar colony formation assay, and so we were taking everybody that was coming to our clinic, and we had the largest phase 1 clinic in the world. We ran about 40 phase 1 clinical trials a year in Texas, and we would take tumor biopsies or ascites fluid from these individuals, and we would plate them out into soft agar colony forming assays, and we would take all the drugs that we were testing in the clinic, and we would test them against the patient's tumors to try to match up sensitivity to their tumor in soft agar to match them up to the clinical trial. And we went into Dan one day and said, hey, this drug called gemcitabine, this drug seems to be active in pancreatic cancer. And he said, well, that's crazy. That's a lymphoma drug. That's not a pancreatic cancer drug. And we said, well, I ran 9 different pancreatic cancer patients, and 7 of them had really nice responses to gemcitabine. So, we went to Eli Lilly, who owned the drug, and said, we think that this drug could work for pancreatic cancer. And eventually, Eli Lilly let us run a clinical trial. We got the drug approved, and it's been the backbone of pancreatic cancer therapy. And that came directly from an assay that we ran in the lab that translated into something that we could do in the clinic. So that was exciting to watch a discovery that we made that actually translated into people. So from CTRC, Dan called me one day and said, hey, Dave, we're moving to University of Arizona. I'm going to take over as the Arizona Cancer Center director. And by the way, I got you a faculty position. I never had to interview. In fact, I don't think I've ever interviewed for a job in my life. But Dan just said, hey, I got you a tenure track faculty position, and here's your startup package. I was like, great, thanks. So we took over from a guy named Sid Salmon. Sid was the founding director of the Arizona Cancer Center, and Sid was the very first board-certified medical oncologist in the world. He is an incredible guy. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he called Dan and said, I want you to come over and take over my life's work. And so Sid and I became very good friends. Unfortunately, he died pretty quickly, but I took over his entire lab. He was the founding cancer center director, and he basically said to me, Dave, I want you to take all of my people, my grants, everything. So I went from a postdoc to a brand new faculty member to having the largest lab at the University of Arizona in 1 year. So I built a very large drug discovery and translational research lab. We published a lot. We discovered 2 drugs that I thought were very interesting. They were brand new targets that we had identified. And I went to Dan and said, well, how do we take these drugs and move them into the clinic? And he said, well, Dave, you're probably the only person in the world that actually believes that these drugs are worth anything. And so if anyone is going to move these forward, it probably has to be you. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, you can do one of 3 things. You can either spin this out into a company that we keep here in Tucson. We'll just incubate it kind of right next to the university, and it'll kind of just be an extension of our lab. We'll get some grants and fund it. I said, yeah, that sounds great. Let's just do that. He says, well, let me tell you the other way to do it. We can find a venture capitalist to help us to just take the technology, find a team to wrap around it, and fund it and make sure it succeeds. I said, yeah, that sounds great too. And he says, yeah, okay, well, let me tell you the last thing you could do is that since you're the only one that really believes in this, maybe you should start a company, leave the university, and take it forward. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't sound good. I don't like that last one. I'd rather stay here. But at the end of the day, what happened was we tried to start the company, and I went out and pitched this technology. And we had actually an angel group. It wasn't a venture group, but angel investing group that said, hey, we like this, but we will fund this if you leave the university and you actually run this company. I was like, no, that's not part of the deal. I didn't want to do that. And they said, well, we'll write you a check for $5 million if you do it. And so I went back to Dan, and Dan's like, well, it's up to you. He said, I wouldn't do it, but if you really believe in it. And so I ended up through a lot of, I decided to bet on myself. I had a faculty position, funding, a big lab, everything that you could ever dream of as a young scientist, I had it. And I decided to walk away from all of that. And I still look back and say, why did I actually do that? How did I do that? When I told the university, the president of the University of Arizona called me into his office and said, you're insane. Like, you have everything everybody ever wants. Like, what do you want? I was like, I'm not doing this for leverage. I'm not trying to get a better position. I have conviction that I believe that this is the right thing for me to do. So I left, started a company called Monogen, moved that company back here to Utah. We were around for only 18 months. We raised $5.2 million to get started. We started the company in 2003. In 2004, we got bought by a company in the Bay Area, and I became their chief scientific officer. During that time, we got a drug approved. The drug that we actually treated my father-in-law with was approved during that time. So I had no idea any of that was going to happen, but looking back, it's incredible that those pieces of that puzzle all came together at that time. So for me, as I mentioned, I've started multiple companies now. I've filed 18 INDs, gotten new drugs into the clinic. I've made every mistake that you can make in building a company. I think, well, there's probably things that I haven't done, but a lot of mistakes. And the difference is now I think that I know what mistakes cost, and I think I've gotten better and better over time. And so to me, I think what I'm trying to do and what one of the focus of my life right now is to try to help other people not make those same mistakes. So it's still what drove me back then is what drives me now. I want other people's grandfathers and grandmothers and moms and dads to stick around a little longer. That's all I care about. People are motivated by a lot of things, but to me, this is my motivation. This is literally all I care about. And the one thing that I've learned over time, starting all these companies, is that good science is good medicine, and good medicine is good business. You can't let the business get ahead of the science, and the science really needs to be right. If you have good science, that can translate into a good medicine, and if you have a good medicine, you can make a business out of it. And so to me, that's really what I've tried to focus on. And so, the reality of drug development is extremely hard. Almost everything fails. It's the only industry that I can think of that's gotten worse the more money we put into it. In my career, at the very beginning when I was involved with ILEX back in the 1990s, we used to say, it takes 7 years and $500 million to get a drug approved. Today, the numbers are 7 years still. It hasn't changed, but it's now $2.9 billion for every drug, and that accounts for all the failures that happen. And the failures are terrible. We're less than 10% successful of drugs that enter the clinic that end up getting approved. I think the number is right around 7% now for all indications. And this is a quote that I love that the CEO of Novartis said, "The miracle of finding the drug that every human being is 40 trillion cells." And it's working together, and I tell our people, you have to think of every medicine is a miracle that fits in the palm of your hand, and that's absolutely true. Discovering a drug, unfortunately, is as much of an art as it is a science. There is no mathematical formula that you could plug into and say, X plus Y equals this, that turns out a drug product. There's still so much art associated with it, and most of the best drug discovery people have a lot of gray hair because they've been through and made a lot of mistakes and learned the art. When you look at how many people are involved, it's a massive industry. There are almost 5 million people involved in the pharmaceutical industry just in the United States. And, direct jobs are about 800,000 direct jobs, but the surrounding CROs, all the things that support the industry is a pretty big industry. And you look at that and there's only 3,600 approved drugs. And most of those drugs don't get used. I think I read something recently that there's probably just under 1,000 drugs that actually get prescribed. And if you look at the ones that make up 90% of the prescriptions, it's literally less than 100 drugs make up 90% of the prescriptions. But that being said, getting a drug approved is a rare and historical event that can change the world. And I think every drug that gets approved has an impact on the world. And that's what's exciting to me. This is a quote long ago that one of my friends said, if Boeing made aircraft the way that we develop drugs, they would develop 10 different aircraft and they would fly them. The one that stayed in the air is the one they would sell. I think that quote was great back then. Today, I'm not sure that might be how Boeing actually develops airplanes now. They've had a lot of setbacks recently, but for us, it just seems so much of a waste to spend all this time and energy on things that never happen. And it literally still is finding a needle in the haystack. I laugh that people say that farming and prostitution are the oldest jobs in the world. I think finding medicines was right up there with them. So I don't know whether it's the number 3 job that but since people have been alive, they've been trying to find ways to find medicines to treat sickness. It's part of being alive as we deal with sickness and illness, and we've been searching for things forever. In fact, some of the oldest writings that we have actually describe the use of opium. So 3,400 years BC, the Sumerians actually wrote in one of the oldest writings that we have, identified the joy plant that they called it, the opium. So that's, as far as human history records, people have been looking for medicinal uses for plants. And one of the things that I laugh about is that, they in books it says there's over 300,000 known plant species and only 5% are edible. How do you know? How do you think we know they're edible? We've eaten them all, right? We've tried them all, and we know, and because we were searching not just for food, but we were searching for medicines, and that's really been the driver of finding new medicines for a long time. Has been trial and error. That, here, try this, eat this. I mean, think about a lot of the medicines. Penicillin was completely identified through serendipity. Almost every drug in the history is identified through serendipity. In fact, it wasn't until the 1990s that we made the first drug that was purposely made to target a specific protein target. It was HIV protease inhibitors were the first drugs that were made actually to target a specific protein. Before that, we used screening and serendipity to find drugs. And ever since then, we've tried to get better and better, and we've made a lot of progress, but we still fail most of the time. And why we fail for safety, and we fail for efficacy. Efficacy is by far the number one reason why drugs fail. They just don't work. And I have a lot of, I don't have enough time to explain to you why I think that's the case, but the reality is, I think we're at the point in time in history that with artificial intelligence, I think for the first time, I think we're going to make huge changes in how we actually discover and develop drugs. And so the future, I think, is going to be very different than where we're standing today. I'm going to go ahead and skip because I know I'll tell you just a little bit about Halia, but I'm going to go very quickly. Halia has been one of the most rewarding things that I've been involved with. We actually started with a genetic experiment in a human population experiment here in Utah using the Utah Population Database. We found a family that had high risk for Alzheimer's disease. We discovered a genetic variant in this family that was protective. And so it protected people with this risk factor from getting Alzheimer's. And my good friend and colleague for many years, Keone Kawe, he was at BYU at the time, he called me and said, could we turn this into a medicine? And I said, yes, let's do that. So that's what we've been doing is translating this protective mechanism that we found. The protection actually was very interesting. It took us a while to figure out what it came from, but we found a pathway that these people with this mutation actually had lower inflammation in their brain. And by lowering inflammation in your brain, you actually protected yourself from getting Alzheimer's disease. And we found a way to drug this pathway, and it seems to work for basically everything. So every chronic disease has an inflammatory component to it. And we've tried in many different indications. We have clinical trials being run now in lots of different places. But I'm going to show you just, you'll be the first ones to see the results of this, just give you a sneak peek of what we're going to present to the rest of the world here soon. But we think that we have proof of concept this actually works. So we just finished up a phase 2A clinical trial in a disease called myelodysplastic syndrome, which is a bone marrow disorder that's caused by inflammation in the bone marrow. And when you get inflammation in your bone marrow, you quit making blood. And that sounds bad, and it is bad. You can't live without blood. And so we have to give these people transfusions all the time. And so we took people that were on transfusions, and we said, could we actually stop them from having to get transfusions? And 66% of the people on this study became transfusion-free, higher percentage in a subset of population. And the cool thing about this is we saw no severe adverse events. So we're excited about what the potential of this could be, that we're not just a one disease company. We have a platform to target inflammation in a brand new way that opens up a possibility of making historic breakthroughs. And this is just the beginning of what we think we could do. So I'm excited about that. So some of the things, some take-home lessons. What moves, so if you want to start a company, what moves your valuation up? Obviously, very, very early, having a clean tox profile, getting your drug ready to go into people, an IND package, having all those boxes checked. If you have a platform, this gives you optionality. It's allows you to be able to have more shots on goal, have a differentiated, validated, competitive story, and build a really good team. What kills your company? Having toxicity that you don't that you ignore early, that's going to come back to bite you. Team gaps will kill you. Not having the right people in the right place, having weak or thin IP. And one of the things that I think people don't realize is raising money. It is so hard. And one of the things that I think I would encourage everybody that's thinking about starting a company in biotech is you need to make sure that your milestone that you're going to hit with the money that you have is that money is going to take you to the next value creating milestone. Stay out of crowded spaces. That's probably a good idea as well. All right, so let me forward to what I see the future looking like. So I think everybody talks about AI, and I think the most important applications in AI in medicine have not been invented yet. In fact, the stuff that we're doing now is probably the most mundane things that we can do with AI. We're just taking old things and trying to make them faster. So we're trying to optimize existing process and trying to do familiar tasks more efficiently with AI. To be honest, I think that's the worst use of AI, and it's what most people are actually focused on right now. It's like, hey, I can screen 1 million things in my lab, and I can screen 5 billion things on a computer. Is that really a breakthrough? Is that really a transformative thing? I think that's just optimizing an existing process. I think what we're going to see in the next few years is really breaking conceptual barriers. I don't think we're even smart enough to know what the most important things that AI are going to do, and we can't even envision what the ultimate impact, how it's going to change things. But what I do know is that the generation of students right now, you're going to live through this. The guys my age, I went to graduate school before the internet was a thing, right? I think I got my first email when I was a graduate student. So I lived through that revolution. I saw how that changed things. I thought that was going to be the revolution that defined my life and my career. But honestly, AI is going to change everything, and it is changing things. And if you don't believe it, if you don't know, that right now, I think you're going to get passed up. So what I would say, to wrap things up, 5 things I want you to learn. Find your mentor. Find your Von Hoff early. Mentors define the trajectory more than your grades. They're more important than your schoolwork. I can't even tell you. I don't even know if anyone's ever asked me what my grades were. I told you I've never interviewed for a job, so I don't even know what it's like to interview for a job. But your grades really don't matter as much as having those relationships in that network. The other thing, if you're a scientist and you want to be in this industry, you need to know something about business. That's a huge mistake that I made. I didn't want to be I didn't want to be an entrepreneur, so I spent all of my time trying to avoid that side of campus. But I would encourage you, the best founders are fluent not just in science, but they understand something about business. Failure is data. Treat it that way. Don't get too upset about things that don't work. Move on, mine it for insight, and move on to the next thing. The other thing I think is important is build in public. I think one of the mistakes that we make is we stay in stealth mode. Everyone's like, oh, I'm in stealth mode. Don't be in stealth mode. Tell your story. Investors fund people before they fund science. They need to see you telling the story. And then the last thing I would encourage everybody is to become AI literate as fast as you can. It's a floor, it's not a ceiling. You need to have these skills in order to be part of the future and prepare for the world that the AI creates, because it is going to change everything, and it is changing everything now. So hopefully, I know I went through that very fast, but I would encourage you, stay curious. I wake up at 4 a.m. every morning, and the very first thing I do every morning is I read. I have agents that go out and find me things to read, and when I wake up in the morning, I usually have a list of over 100 articles to read, both business articles, scientific articles. I've never once stopped being curious about whether what we know is the best that we can do, and that's what I'm always challenging myself is, am I doing the best thing that I can? And the other thing is seize the opportunity that's in front of you. You're sitting in the exact right room at the exact same time, at the exact right time. Don't waste this opportunity. When doors open, walk through them. Take advantage of opportunities. Be prepared to seize that opportunity. Hopefully, that's the best advice I can give you. And hopefully that's been beneficial. Hopefully it was a good time to spend your lunch. Thank you very much.